Hi, everyone. I think everybody is in for now. Thanks for waiting, and thanks for joining Encinitas Viewpoint. It's good to see everybody, and it's really wonderful to welcome Ian Thompson, the author of An Inconvenient Voice, the story of Maggie Houlihan. He has a great presentation prepared. But before we get on with Ian, we're just going to say a quick hello to Julie, Susan, and Alex. Julie?
Hi, everybody. And I wanted to say, look what I have. I get to start it now. Woo-hoo. Hey.
It's an excellent book for anyone who is considering reading it.
Rachel's got it. Everyone's holding it up.
Yeah, yeah, oh, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm about 2/3 through. I love it. Ian, I think that we're going to hand the floor over to you right away. And
Cindy, would you introduce the other two candidates?
Yes, yeah. Sorry. I basically just said Julie, Susan, and Alex, and you guys.
Okay, we're here.
Hi, and there you go. Do you guys have if you got something to say, you can have the floor first.
Okay, thanks.
Yes? No? You're good? Okay. All right. It truly is yours, Ian.
All right. First thing I'd like to say is a little bit of housekeeping for the panel. If during my presentation a fly flies into the room and lands on my head, would you let me know, please?
No.
Okay. Here we go. If I can share. Can I share?
You can share.
Okay, here we go.
Ian, before you start, everybody else on the call, make sure you go into full screen so you can see everything big on your screen that he's showing. If you can't see it, there is a full screen option somewhere in your Zoom settings. Okay, it's all yours, Ian.
Okay. Well, the title for tonight's presentation is Fear and Loathing in Encinitas. And for anyone who's familiar with the Hunter Thompson novel, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, this presentation is not about a drug-fueled romp from Los Angeles down to Encinitas. So no fears there. However, as I weave the story of the book into the presentation, you will probably identify some areas of fear and loathing that come through in the presentation. What I'd like to do is give you a brief synopsis of the story, go through the major points, skipping over primarily the youth portion of Maggie's life and focusing more so on the political aspects in the book. And then I've got a series of slides after that to show you where you'll see the narrative actually have relevance, obviously to the early 2000s, but also to today's election and some of the challenges that we face. So this is the book. Maggie was born in Hollywood, grew up in Long Beach, California, a fairly oppressive blue-collar environment at home and a blue-collar environment where she lived. She found solace in the beach and grew up in the fledgling surfing environment of the late 60s and early 70s and just loved the beach. If there was one other escape that she had, it was scholastic. She greatly enjoyed school and did very well in school. When she reached the age of 16, she was able to get into the various clubs in the area. And there's a great story about her at the airport club in Seal Beach. She was about 16 years of age and would go there and listen to up-and-coming bands at the time and got tickets to a Tina Turner concert. So she was there enjoying the concert that evening, and there was a gang there who had a member by the name of Big Mama. And of course, Maggie, being Maggie, was out on the dance floor most of the evening, and Big Mama took exception to this and eventually came out onto the dance floor and started a fight with her. Well, as they're in the fight, so the bouncers start approaching, and her friends grab her and haul her off to the bathroom before they're thrown out. And they're in there getting sorted out, and an attendant comes in and says, spots Maggie and says, would you come to Tina Turner's dressing room, please? And of course, Maggie's thinking she's about to get admonished for ruining the show with brawling in front of the stage. So she goes back there, but sheepishly, and goes in, and there's Ike Turner in the corner, and the Ikeettes are there, and the band's there. And Tina Turner asks her to sit down and gets her name and introduces her. And then promptly goes into evaluating and analyzing Maggie's brawling techniques, complimenting her on managing to stay on her feet, but not being mean enough in the fight to inflict severe bodily harm on her assailant, which put her at a disadvantage. And of course, Maggie's jaw was dropping because here was a woman who grew up as a bartender and certainly knew about fighting, etc. And had a great conversation with Tina Turner. So that was a kick when she was young. Finished school, had all the qualifications for an Ivy League education, got the application forms, put them in front of her father, and her father said, "I'm not signing them. These are financial disclosure forms and the government has no right to know what money I earn," as if they don't already. So with that, an Ivy League education was shot down. She returned to the beach, buried herself in surfing, took some surf trips, and one of those surf trips was to Encinitas, where she greatly enjoyed her time here, but realized she had to get some kind of schooling under her. So settled for Long Beach State, which is a great school, and started her education there. And lo and behold, down at the beach, met a gentleman and ended up getting married and having a young son. The marriage went sideways and she wanted to get out of the situation and went to her parents to ask for money so she could survive outside of the marriage. And they looked at her in horror because this was the time when you stood by your man, and basically shot her down cold. So she went to her husband's parents in a last-ditch effort, and because her husband was somewhat entitled, they refused any financial aid as well. So she was faced with a decision whether to try and cut it on her own or to basically buckle down, live at home, and try and make a life for herself and her son in Long Beach. She chose the difficult side of that decision, and in a beat up station wagon, 2 cats and a dog and a 2-year-old child, and about $400 in her pocket, drove down to Encinitas to start a new life. She found a motel to live in, and now she is faced with poverty and the responsibility of her family. Gets a job in the Compass West print shop, and then quickly moves into a position at the Bank of America, which gives her a little more security. So they rent a couple rooms. They had no kitchen, and gets a hot plate so that she could cook for the family. The reason I'm saying this now is this is an individual who understood poverty and understood difficulties in finding a place to live. This is someone who went through the experience, which is relevant, as you'll see later on in my presentation. After she'd been in Encinitas for a while, she got another boyfriend. The boyfriend said, "Hey, you're pretty smart, you should go back to school." So she went back to UCSD, interviewed there, and they accepted her. And then she was faced with a decision again. I've just dug my way out of poverty, and now going back to school is going to thrust me back into that crucible of hand to mouth, finding money, finding ways to live. But she decided that the education came first, and so she cobbled together jobs doing making clothes, cleaning houses, ironing clothes, stuffing envelopes, and discovered by coincidence that there was a program where the government, because of her income and her child, would give her some monies that she could get by with. So with that subsistence income and working those extra hours, she put herself through UCSD, promptly went on to score a job in the Central Library there, where she worked for the working portion of her life versus the political portion of her life. In the course of working at the library, I met Maggie and we got married under some unusual circumstances, and I'm not going to tell you what they are. That's a teaser, so you'll read the book to find out. But we got married, and a few years later, as our careers progressed and we became more financially secure, she started getting involved with animal issues and animal activism, the environment, started an organization called STOP, which was Stop Taking Our Pets. The animal shelters were selling them to research labs. So she got involved with politics through that, and eventually became upset at the way the city was being developed. And this was 2 or 3 councils removed from our forefathers who actually incorporated the city away from the county of San Diego because they were as concerned then as she was at that point in her life. So she came to me and said, I want to run for city council, but to do it properly, I'm going to have to quit my job. So fortunately, I was in a position to make that possible. So she quit her job and set about running for council. Now, this is an individual with no backing, no financial backing from PACs or development interests or corporations or sugar daddies, anything else. But she had some weapons up her sleeve, and she put together a tremendous campaign committee, which was shepherded and actually managed by Bruce Ehlers, did a great job throughout her 3 elections, and went about getting elected. No money, no great war chest to spend on mailers, etc. So how the heck do you get elected? Well, her platform gathered a lot of interest and momentum within the residents of Encinitas. And she actually put together an army of foot soldiers who went out into the communities, the districts, knocked on doors, handed out leaflets, went in front of grocery stores, answered questions, handed out paraphernalia. And at the end of the day, she got elected second out of the 3 available seats. First was Jim Bond, second was Maggie, and third was Jerome Stocks. That was in a non-COVID world, of course. Our current 3 candidates here have a much more difficult job. There's nothing more powerful than looking someone in the eye and explaining your platform to them and educating them. Doing it digitally through forums, etc., it loses an edge. Nevertheless, these 3 folks are doing a great job. So she entered the world of politics. One of the first tasks she had was as a member of the board of the Encina Wastewater Authority. And an item came up on an early agenda where they had a plot of land beside the plant, which they wanted to lease out. And so the discussion about leasing started, and she realized that the incumbent or apparent incumbent for the role of leasing agent was development consultant David C. Meyer, who is in Encinitas. And as the discussion continued, it struck her that to have an incumbent in what was a no-bid situation was not necessarily the best deal for the taxpayers. And if David Meyer was the right person, then he should float to the top of the pool in a bid situation where other companies can come in and make presentations and tout their expertise. So David Meyer was chagrined at this situation and nevertheless joined the bidding process, came in with a less than impressive, I would say, bid, about 4 or 5 sheets. There's grammatical error on the second page, approximated the acreage of the land that was for lease. The cost of the project was open-ended, and that was his presentation with all the rest of the detail, of course. Keyser Marston stepped in with a 12-page presentation with the exact acreage of the property, exactly what the project would cost the wastewater authority, who was going to be involved with handling the project, what their resumes were, what would happen if there was a conflict of interest, and on for 12 pages. And it was night and day between the 2 bids, and Keyser Marston won the bid. Well, this didn't sit well with Mr. Meyer, and so he set about a campaign of targeting Ms. Houlihan in the election season. Shortly after that happened, certain members of the council traveled to Amoxa, Japan, our sister city. And Maggie realized there was a triathlon in the city at the time, their annual triathlon, and asked if a kind of a social group from Encinitas could compete, just socially. And so we put together a team. Jerome Stocks did the swim, Maggie did the cycling part, and actually the mayor of Amoxa, Mayor Yasuda, would run the last leg to the finish line. So as many people will know, the story is not new. During the bike race, Maggie heard a kitten mewing from the hedgerow and discovered a kitten up there in the brambles with a cord around its neck that was in danger of strangling it. Being the animal activist she is, she dismounted, gave up her leg of the race. The team called ahead. Mayor Yasuda took off and ran the last leg of the run, and Maggie brought the kitten back to the city and found a home for it. Well, this blew up into an international incident of unmitigated proportion. as we perhaps have all read from the newspapers. And she was vilified up one side and down the other, not least of which from information that came from other council members on the trip. And as you can see, there was some clouds gathering amongst this council.
Ian, this is Susan. Are you, we're not seeing slides moving along. Are you flipping slides or not yet?
Not yet. Not
Okay,
yet.
just checking, sorry.
Yeah. The net result of this was David Meyer saw an opportunity, and he came out and produced a clown that then stalked her through the 2004 election, which eventually she won. And then she went on to champion or to question density bonus within our development culture within the city, and why we had it, and what it was doing to the town. Later on in the story, there was a landscaper whose property was opposite our house, who defrauded the city council into allowing him to stay on the property with an illegal operation. And I'll tell you more about that later. And then the book goes on to Kitchen Gate with Dan Gallagher, more misbehavior, shenanigans at the visitor center, as it was managed by the Chamber of Commerce. And also the Ecke family is in the book with an earlier version of Proposition A, where they came back to develop 60 acres of land that was in agricultural perpetuity as a deal of developing the Encinitas Ranch a few years earlier. So peppered between all of this are humanitarian actions, environmental actions, animal-related causes, an elderly Hispanic woman that we ended up taking in because she was bilked out of her house and was heading for the streets against her will. And also a child from Chernobyl we brought over for 2 years in a row to bolster her immune system, get her medical checkups through the Children of Chernobyl Foundation. And all of this was her doing. She was certainly the humanitarian in our partnership. So that's a little bit about the book. So let me get into why you're hearing about this and its relevance to today's world. This is a graphic that somebody has created showing how special interest money, and in particular developer dollars, are entering our election environment. Once again, this is not unusual. And we see Marco Gonzalez at the top left with his North County PAC. Marco, an excellent attorney. I've used his law firm. Great respect for his legal capabilities. But we see here, he's giving over $20,000 to Catherine Blakespeare. As we follow the clock to the lower left, we have a couple of developers with interests in, of course, Measure U, 9 developers below. And then we have Mr. Verdu, obviously a high net worth individual who's pumping $30,000 into this campaign. I've been on Mr. Verdu's Facebook page. He appears to be an animal lover, an environmentalist. But nevertheless, he is also a political activist, and with $30,000 in this race, he obviously is going to be shaping our politics in our city and impacting the lives one way or another of the residents of Encinitas.
Ian?
Yes.
That number recently went up to 55,000.
There we are. All the more reason why we should take special interest in Mr. Verdu and his point of view. There's nothing illegal in what he's doing. He has absolutely every right to do it. But in response, of course, the residents have every right to know what this money is intended for and how it will shape our city today and potentially moving forward. The small graphic at the bottom of the council members showing that they vote 90% of the time the same way is of concern. And I'll get into that in more detail later on. But the constituents that I've talked to, the residents that I've spoken to in Encinitas, I rarely find that they all agree 90% of the time. So I would question the representation that we're getting on our council here. So with this money coming into the election season, our politicians, our candidates give up a certain amount of autonomy. Anybody who believes somebody is going to be a philanthropic giver to an election campaign and expect nothing in return has been living under a rock for some years. And that's the way the process works. And we see that at the national level and also at the local level. In the early 2000s, the councils of the early 2000s gave up their autonomy. There'll be examples later on of Jerome Stocks and Barrett America, support for the Eckies. So money in campaigns comes at a price. This is an example of a situation that Mr. Stocks found himself in after accepting developer dollars from Barrett America, $2,600 in kind, when the limit is $250, and having been exposed for that, returned an additional 11 payments, some of whom were to developers, having exceeded the limit. And Mr. Stocks explained that away as being a mistake. And I guess we have to take him at his word. This was an early sign of the coziness that some of our council members had with development interests. Back then, around that era, the original Prop A came up when the Eckie family wanted to develop some of the 60 acres, I think it was, that they had put in agricultural perpetuity after they developed the ranch. And now they were back wanting to develop some of those acres. If Maggie were not on the council at that time, I understand, as I understand it, and let's say an Eckie-friendly member was on that council would have had a supermajority, and Proposition A would not have had to go to the residents of the city. So it would have been voted on by the council unanimously, and those acres would have been developed, as I understand it, talking to her. The issue, as you can see, I'm building here is, where is this contrary opinion? Where is this voice that represents the residents of this town when they aren't in the majority, when they need a seat at the table? Any good CEO or business person understands that you don't just want to hear what you want to hear and move forward with initiatives. You need the people with the contrarian opinions, a diversity of opinions, the devil's advocate. So when something goes out the door, it is the best product you can possibly come up with. You don't want anything exposed once it's on the outside. When you have a council that walks in lockstep, it begs a question. Why do they walk in lockstep? So here's Maggie back on the beat again, up against development interests. And there's a couple of things that I want to talk to you about here. Maggie Houlihan was not anti-growth. She was never anti-development. She was somewhat pragmatic about it and understood that our city is one of the most desirable cities in California, the United States, and the world, and there is going to be development. Her argument that we should have was that we should have development that is in sync with our community, doesn't kill our community character, and doesn't impact the neighborhoods in such a way that development stands out like a sore thumb. Were she to see the Goodson project today, I'm sure she would be turning in her grave. And along with the Goodson project, of course, there's 5, I believe, developments in front of the council at the moment. And there's some issues with the allocation of low-income housing in those developments. And perhaps one of the panel members could give a little more detail to how we're getting in a hole with our low-income housing allocation.
I can explain. So the city turned into the state and showed residents that 100% of all the units would be affordable. And so, for example, for Goodson, they showed that 225 units that as the base units would also be 100% affordable. So they turned 225 into the state. They're allowing him to build just 15% or 42 units when all is said and done with density bonus. And so on that project alone, we already fell behind, what is that, 180 or some odd units. And the first 5 projects that have been applied for have already taken out our buffer and is putting us in the hole.
Thank you, Susan. Just a note here, if anybody is considering from the presentation here that Maggie was against low-income housing, that's absolutely not the case. As I spoke earlier about in the book, she lived in poverty in Encinitas in the early days and had trouble finding places to live. And even in her council tenure, worked with Shea Homes on the Iris development down on Vulcan Avenue, which is a low-income project. So this wasn't a vigilante out to upend and stop development within Encinitas.
Ian, can I jump in? It's
Yes, certainly.
The Iris project, I was briefed on, and it's actually one of the examples that I use of how we can do affordable housing. I don't know it to the nth degree, but I see a project that doesn't overwhelm its neighborhood, but yet provides a service to people who need to pay less to live. And I just think it makes more sense to do a bunch of those, if we could, throughout the city instead of these big mega projects. But I really admire that project. I've driven through it and I've talked to some of the residents. It's nice.
Yeah, I believe it's part low income and part, full rate. But I have to hand it to Shea Homes on that one. They reached out to Maggie. They understood her issues with community character and reached out to work with her. Didn't chase her around with a clown or do any of these other antics. Chose to work with the city, with somebody who had the highest concerns about what was going on with development, and came up with a project that I think is a good project. Some people will disagree. I think it's a good project. So before we get to the clown, developer dollars, developer behavior. Not all developers, of course, are necessarily bad people. They have a business to run. They have profit margins to be concerned about. They have a strategy, not unlike any other business. Here is an example of an individual developer. This was Kathleen Porterfield with a school she was developing on the San Elijo Lagoon. And there were concerns about a sewer line running that close to the lagoon, and Maggie was against it. And so out came the dollars, and $56,000 was spent by Ms. Porterfield to defeat Maggie Houlihan. And this was in addition to the sum $80,000 that David C. Meyer and another developer, Douglas Harwood, who is the late Douglas Harwood now, who lived in Rancho Santa Fe, didn't live in Encinitas where his developments are, some of them, came up with $80,000 on top of this $56,000 to defeat her. And of course, but wait, it goes further. The clown came back, and despite the furore about the clown and the pillorying of Maggie Houlihan in the press, the public weighed in, and public opinion in terms of the letters from residents within the city, residents outside the city, residents outside the county, and individuals outside the country, namely Japan, contacted the media and said, you know, you're making a big fuss about this, and quite frankly, we admire her for the act that she took the initiative to conduct during the triathlon. Nevertheless, out came the clown, and this was David Meyer's clown. On the back of that placard, it said, "It's not about the cat; it's about common sense." So he again went after her. This clown would appear at business sundowners downtown, community center events, installation dinners. The clown was always there. And I love the cartoon on the right-hand side. This is when public opinion was shifting and the media was starting to get it, that people actually realized that it was a wonderful act that she did. And you got the two old folks there with all their cats and the critical newspaper, and they're saying she's got my vote, and she certainly did. They represented many residents of the city, and she ended up winning. And this time she beat James Bond and Jerome Stocks and came out with the most votes of any of them. So that was a nice, nice turn of events there. Of course, it didn't stop there. We continue with the hit pieces and the smear campaign. And this is kind of a lesson to people who represent the residents, of the residents, and for the residents. It's often a tough struggle. You are going up against interests that see the opportunity to profit from the city of Encinitas, whether they live here or not. And they are generally well-heeled individuals who will spare no expense to see that you are taken off that council. So the smear campaign continued, and Mr. Meyer went at it again with newspapers blast Maggie Houlihan. Here's the common sense thread coming in on the backside of that mailer. Apparently Maggie Houlihan was anti-kids and anti-family, despite having a kid and a family of her own. She was all in it for more traffic, reduced homeowner rights. There may have been an element of truth to that, but in the interests of the majority. And of course, she loved new taxes. And this information was confidential. It was only for all the residents of Encinitas. And had I known all of this information, I probably wouldn't have voted for her myself. Capped off by a sticker campaign where stickers appeared everywhere, vote no on Houlihan, save Encinitas, and even appeared on our mailbox. So this was the campaign that the developers, and I have to be careful to tar the developers with one brush. They're obviously good developers. They're running a business. This is a business opportunity for them. Not all of them are obviously going to stoop to these depths in order to get opposition off the council. Although, as we have seen in the past, and perhaps we're seeing today, they do open up the purse strings to development-friendly candidates, and the residents should be aware of that. So the density bonus issue came up, and Maggie was against that because of the community character issue, and she made her voice known. And not only did she make her voice known, but she dug into it a little deeper. And I've seen this from our three candidates that we have on the panel today. In terms of the numbers and the analysis behind the initiatives and the projects, what's really going on? And Maggie unearthed with density development bonuses that if the developer keeps title to the house, then after, or the unit, whatever it may be, after a 30-year period, that unit or that house returns to their ownership. So if anybody wants a really good retirement program, this was the one. But it took some digging to understand it, and she was willing to pay the price time and again, and fought the good fight to unearth the analytics and to understand the data and to present that data to the residents for their appraisal and review.
Ian, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Did she, at this point, did she have any friends on council? That's not the word I mean. Associates that worked with her?
No, when she first got on council, Dennis Holtz was on the council, very smart attorney, progressive, and there was Dennis and Maggie, and Christy Guerin was a swing vote. And that was a good council, a good healthy council. Dennis failed to get re-elected. Dan Gallagher came onto the council in 2002, I think it was. And the council changed, the culture of the council changed, and it became very adversarial. And now you've got 4 people against 1 person, essentially. And that was how things were for the bulk of Maggie Houlihan's political life until much later on, when Teresa Barth provided some relief when she was elected, but that was towards the end of Maggie's time. So she was fighting this and fighting it both on council and outside council. The activities of the council didn't stop within City Hall, it went outside from time to time. And here is an example. Houlihan is a whore. Well, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have married her. This is a landscape business owner, and this property is directly across the street from where we used to live. And he put this sign up and he painted this all down the sides of the greenhouses you see in the distance in huge letters so it was visible from the freeway. What had happened is the planning commission had determined that his landscaping business was illegal, wasn't allowed. The property wasn't zoned for a landscaping business. He claimed that there had been a landscaping business on that property since before the city incorporated, and therefore it was non-conforming. But as long as he didn't break this continuance of a landscaping business, he was allowed to be there. So he contested the planning department's decision and appealed to the council and came forward with a raft of information, letters from landscaping businesses that had supposedly been on the property, receipts from service companies that service the landscape industry, letters from employees, business owners, contractor license numbers. And it didn't quite seem right, and the planning department saw it that way as well, and they turned his application down. So Maggie, who was recused because the property is directly opposite, or was directly opposite our house, set about doing some sleuthing and finding out if this documentation was real. And what she discovered was that every single piece of paper had either a poached letterhead and the name of a correct business owner who never had a business on the property, contractor license numbers that had been taken from other businesses and used to support his case, and on and on. And so I wasn't recused. So I took this information in front of the council and proved over a 9-minute presentation on PowerPoint without a shadow of a doubt that Russell Bowman had provided fraudulent information. When I'd finished my presentation, his attorney from the law firm of Wallace, McDade, Wirtz and Brower, I think it was, from downtown, spent his time backpedaling and trying to get out of the situation. It was a classic farce. So you think the council, when presented with this information, would do the right thing by the residents of this city. These rules and zoning requirements are there for the benefit of the city at large and the residents at large. And instead, they took the information and gave Russell Bowman not only the right to continue his business, but also to intensify it. So of course, we were quite shocked by this. And so we took this information to the grand jury, positive that this was misbehavior on the part of the council, and that they had no right openly, in full view of the public, accepting fraudulent information, which they had done, and come to a decision in favor of Mr. Bowman, the landscape business owner. The grand jury held it for a while, and we ended up contacting them because it had been in such a long time, and found that they had forwarded the information to the district attorney, Bonnie Dumanis at the time. So after numerous attempts to contact Bonnie Dumanis's office, we eventually got an interview with the investigator, only to discover that they were looking at Russell Bowman and nothing to do with the council, which is interesting because our complaint was all about the council, and that if the grand jury feels there's illegal activity, they will forward it to the district attorney. Now, Bonnie Dumanis is running for other city office or county office later on. I think she went for county supervisor. Whether she was trying not to ruffle the feathers of other politicians, I don't know. But it's chilling under a situation where you have a council majority that is willing to do this, and there is no recourse in this case. There was no recourse through the legal channel. So this is another danger when you have a council that can best be said had a vindictive approach to their peer who was alone in this, was willing to flout and violate the law in front of the public for what can only be classified as being cruel and unusual punishment. but that was the way it was. What also was interesting is that the council majority at the time didn't mention anything in the newspapers, any interviews anywhere about their concern with behavior like this. Politicians from other cities did, but our council majority remained silent when all this was going on, which I think was a shame.
Where we heard that before.
So the next issue that came up, and again, this what I'm getting to, and I hope you can see this, is the importance of having a diversity of opinion on our city council. It's vital that these the voices get heard that are different than perhaps the majority voice. Without that, you don't have good governance, and if you're voting 90% of the time in line with everybody else, what's going wrong? Where's the dialogue? Where is the voice that represents those residents amongst us who disagree? This is a situation where the visitor center was managed by the Chamber of Commerce, and the contract was coming up. Taxpayer money funded much of the visitor center operations. And Maggie discovered that the visitor center was, lo and behold, closed on the weekends, and that they had asked all the volunteers to leave. So no volunteers and no visitor center on the weekends, arguably its most important time. So the contract came up, she raised these issues, and the contract was awarded, but with the proviso that an independent audit was conducted of the Chamber's funds. And lo and behold, it was found that Gary Tucker, the president at the time, and Michael Andreen were, as the report said, misusing city funds. And I could give you more detail about that, but in the interest of alacrity, I won't. Mr. Andreen was a staunch supporter of Jerome Stocks, as we can see from his Surf City Times, the Chamber newsletter, the Wirefire email threads that he would put out, et cetera, et cetera. And he also supported the majority on the council, which was pro-development at the time. Without Maggie's voice, my question is, would this have been exposed, or would it have been brushed under the rug? If you can ignore fraudulent information from a resident who wants to conduct an illegal business, how easy would it have been to ignore this and move forward? And we could have taxpayer funds today being misappropriated from the chamber for other purposes. So again, it's the importance of having a diversity. The concept of our current mayor feeling that a 5-0 vote is something to be proud of. In certain situations, perhaps, but 90% of the time says to me, there's something wrong at City Hall. This is a situation that is in the book. Actually, no, I don't think it is. It's not in the book. This is a situation where I don't even think the toxic council majorities of the early 2000s would even stoop this low as to sue the residents. What we have here is a council that solicited resident input, came up with a plan that the residents voted down because it gave away too much to the state, despite working on committees and having council meetings in front of the public and pulling certain properties like L7 out of the plan, et cetera, et cetera. The plan gave away too much. And it took a group of concerned residents to educate the city as to what was going on. And when the residents heard this, they got it. And so obviously they voted it down. Proposition A, from my perspective, using taxpayer dollars to sue the residents of the city is absolutely outrageous, and would call for this entire council to be slung out and let's get a new one that respects the people who elected them to office. It was using taxpayer dollars. It can only be described as a slap across the face for daring to challenge a council decision. And before anybody howls, oh, there was this time limitation, we'd done it so many times before, the state was leaning on us, et cetera, et cetera. This draws the line between strong leadership and what I would call people who are going along with the flow. When the going gets tough, strong leadership steps up, and there were ways that weren't explored to negotiate with the state, some way to figure this thing out. But did that happen on this council? No. The entire council sued the residents of Encinitas. So my question is, where was the contrary voice on council that challenged the detail in Measure U in the first place? Where was the voice on the council that said we are giving away too much? Where was the voice that said we need to redo Measure U because we, the council, own it. It is ours. And where was the voice that said, no, I will not stand by and let our residents be sued? Not a single council member. Everybody went along with the flow, and I was one of the signatories on Proposition A, and Ms. Blakespeare and her council set about suing me. And that was the end of my relationship, certainly, with this council. The residents of the city are asking, I believe, for very little. I don't intend to speak on their behalf, but I think I can take a leap of faith and say that we only need two good things in this city. The first one is a healthy diversity of opinion. 90% of our votes being agreed upon by all of the council members is not a healthy diversity of opinion. The taxpayers are not getting value for money. Maybe other people are or will be, but the residents are not. And the government and the leadership needs to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that at the moment, with this influx of financial element into our elections, threatens that. So the residents need to pay attention and get out and vote and do the right thing to get this council back on track. And that concludes my presentation.
God, that was so amazing, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. That was fantastic. Very enjoyable. I know folks have a couple of questions. If anyone wants to question via the chat or raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, and of course the candidates as well. So if anybody has any questions, just let me know. I actually do have a question. I'll start off actually, that someone had emailed me earlier, Ian, if that's okay. And I think certainly a valid question. With approximately 3 weeks left until the election, and if Maggie were still with us, what advice do you think she would give to the 3 underdogs running for city council?
You're in it to win it. And 3 weeks can be a long time in an election. And it's the period of time where you need to work the hardest. It's the time when the hit pieces arrive, when dollars are spent, not necessarily to elect a favorite candidate, but to see that another candidate does not get elected. So in watching her through campaigns, I was certainly an orphan of the process towards the end of the campaign, because she was out meeting with constituents, making visits, handing out leaflets, meeting with her team, figuring out what people were saying, how to combat the negativity, et cetera, et cetera. These last 3 weeks are critical, and they're hard. I have every respect for these 3 individuals who are trying to get on the council. That's toughest of all. It's always easier if you're an incumbent. And there's a lot of support for you in the community, and I wish them all well.
I think we all do. I have a question from Gail. What would Maggie think of the current council? Teresa Barth was a colleague of Maggie's. She also supports the incumbents.
I don't think Maggie would. Maggie, and I respect Teresa Barth. Teresa Barth is a friend. Dawn and Teresa, I like them as human beings, as individuals, but we have a right to have a difference of opinion. To a degree, I think what we have on this council is this council has come after the toxicity of the councils that Maggie served on. And I think up to a point, the residents are taking a breath and saying, thank goodness we don't have that animosity, that fighting that bled across the dais to the point where some of the council members were even disrespectful to residents who spoke. So I think she would be concerned. It would probably start as being an issue-based concern. And if she was on the council, she'd be digging into the same analysis that our current panel is doing to find out the devil behind the details, such as, you know, the giving away too much in Proposition U. She would have been all over that for a start. But and there may even be people on our council today who have similar feelings. But the issue is stand up. There are individuals in our community who support you. You don't have to do the same thing. This is not a healthy council if you are all doing the same thing and walking in lockstep. That's not what the residents have voted for. Of course, we will see how that pans out. If this is what the residents want, then we may lose a part of Encinitas that we now have the opportunity to maintain in terms of development and character. And if you want to go with the flow and you like the harmony and you don't like any discord and you don't like any arguing, then vote your conscience.
Thanks, Ian. A question from Scott Plattenberg, who really enjoyed your book. Is there anything not in the book that you would want to add if you could? That's a great question.
Yes, but I don't want to get arrested. The book never started out as a book. It started out as a series of kind of journal entries for Maggie's grandson who never knew her. He was 1 or just over the age of 1 when she died. And in talking to people, they said, well, that's kind of an interesting story. You ought to write a book about it. And I sloughed it off. And then I thought, well, write it as a book. And then if you don't do anything with it, at least you can give it to the family. And it'll be something when he grows up, he can understand the caliber of his grandmother. And eventually it came to the point where, okay, it's a book and I'm going to go for it and damn the torpedoes. You only go around once. But my hesitancy was there's a lot of private stuff in this book. And it's difficult to put your life out in front of the public for anybody to evaluate and analyze. But it's pretty much all out there in the book, all the juicy stuff, the murder, the drugs, the sex, such as it is all out there. And I don't think without going into a lot more detail about the candidates, I could do it. And one other thing, the book, the most expensive part of self-publishing this book was a $3,000 legal review from a downtown law firm. I also had to be careful using my own personal opinion in order to avoid defaming people, because there's a lot that's not in the book that would indicate my anger and concern about individuals. So in terms of what could be published and would keep me out of court and stop me being arrested, it's all in there.
Ian, may I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Is that you, Laurie?
Cindy, can you hear me?
You're breaking up,
hear me?
but we're kind of hearing you. Try your question.
Okay, Ian, if Ian can hear me.
I can hear you. Yes, Laurie.
Mine
You're
says
loud and clear.
internet connection is unstable, sort of like me. Ian, can you?
Yes, I can.
Okay, okay, quick question then. How did Lisa Schaefer get Maggie to endorse?
That's a little sensitive. Lisa was Maggie's pick. or at least Maggie indicated that Lisa would be a good candidate. And I'm not sure how many candidates there were at the time who would promote a similar platform to Maggie's platform. We disagreed on the way she went about getting her endorsement. Maggie was at the end of her life at that point, and Lisa was very focused on getting this endorsement and almost to the point of ignoring the physical plight that Maggie was in. And ultimately Maggie did endorse her. I had coffee with Lisa afterwards to express my concern about her process, and we certainly made good and have moved on. But at the end of the day, Lisa was her choice. So the endorsement was heartfelt and sincere.
Thanks, Lori. I have a question from Leah Bissonnet. What do you think are the most important campaign strategies, walk-in calling, mail-in pieces, et cetera, for our challengers today?
Well, that's interesting because campaigning, the model of campaigning now and post-COVID, I believe, has changed forever. But there is no substitute for looking someone in the eye and having them look you in the eye and see if you mean what you say, and listen to their concerns and their points of view, and see if you can persuade them around to your platform if they aren't on board. I campaigned with Maggie on more than one occasion, not as much as her team, but we campaigned. We went around, knocked on doors. It's a tough job, I think. I certainly wouldn't want to do a lot of it. But that has now been taken away. That is the most effective way of all. You look at Ocasio-Cortez in New York. She wore out goodness knows how many pairs of shoes walking around her districts, and got elected against the odds, against huge odds. And Maggie got elected against the odds with no money. And I think that that face-to-face is critical. Now, it's a question of, if you can get out, hang something on a door knocker, at least it means somebody's been to the door and is concerned enough to put human power behind something, rather than enter the digital world and just spew emails and things like that, which of course are now even more important because we're tending to elect people digitally and through streaming video. But I think, if anything, streaming video is a good option, but then the challenge becomes how many people are going to elect to go and watch your streaming video versus open the door when you're knocking on it. Yeah, it's a different world. It's changed now. It will have been changed forever, I think, with COVID. And I would say videos, and at least go to those doors and hang something on the door to show that you've been there. If you can sign it, sign a note, whatever. I mean, we're talking about things being labor intensive now, but that's I think how they would be the best option today.
And do you think that Maggie would have embraced social media, which maybe we're in a bubble, but seems to be very much utilized by candidates, often opponents, and certainly those that support either side?
Well, having worked in the tech world for a lot of my working life myself, I would have to say that Maggie was no technophile, and she personally would not. But this is smart leadership. What she surrounded herself with were people who did know things like that. And she recognized if she had a weakness and she needed to fill it, and she could rely on Bruce Ehlers to fill the gaps and to find the people who could do the things that needed to be doing. Now, she's the candidate. Would she need to go through it and approve it and look at it and have ideas and present her platform the way she wanted it to be presented? Yes, but certainly she was pragmatic. She would understand that in order to get elected, I'm not just appealing to 60 years and older. We've got millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, people who are connected all the time. If I'm going to stay as a council member or mayor, or I'm in state office at this point, which I probably imagine she would have been by now, I've got to move with the times. So I don't think that she necessarily would be the one on the keyboard, but she would definitely have embraced it, yes.
Thanks, Ian. Lori, go ahead.
You know, as recently as 2 hours ago, our door was approached by two local neighbors and well-respected Democratic local activists in our neighborhood. I live in the District 2, Susan Turney's district, and they were putting the door knockers for Democratic candidates. And I began discussion with them about, I have my Susan Turney sign. That's not here. That's not my dog barking.
My dog, sorry.
Okay. And I said, I'm really looking for some diversity on the council and looking for an opinion that does represent the Encinitas residents. And we talked a little bit about affordable housing. And they said, well, you know, you can't fight the state. I'm cutting the chase here because that was their argument. And look at Del Mar and look at how much money they've spent. And that was their argument for the current council acquiescing to whatever they're doing to justify what they're doing with housing. So I'm just wanted to put that out there, and I don't know if this late date what we can do, but I needed to put that out there. And I also wanted to ask you, Ian, if you're willing to do kind of a book signing in the local area for people who know you and know Maggie and want to get to know you closer. We could do some distancing, if that's something you'd consider.
Yes, it is, but let me answer your first point about you can't fight City Hall, you can't fight the state. I'm going to ask Susan to represent the council here, because I know there's something going on with at least Susan, if not all three of the panelists, about joining with other cities to at least challenge and question these housing mandates that are coming down. If somebody wants to jump in from the panel.
Sure, I'm happy to. So yeah, so I'm at least a 2-year member of a group called Livable California. It's made up of city electeds from up and down the state, Mayor of Redondo Beach, Mayor of Cupertino, up and down the state. Anyway, they are making progress. We are making progress. We recently killed 7 of the 9 bad housing bills. You absolutely can fight the state. We were just joined by another group. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but anyway, it's a huge group, equally powerful. We just found one another, and they actually are hiring attorneys to fight the state, because we just learned that our numbers have been double counted in terms of affordable housing allocations. Every city up and down the state should be screaming about it. All the SANDAGs, ABAGs, SCAGs should be screaming about it. Our mayor is not questioning the fact that the numbers have been double counted. This is a report that came out of the respected Embarcadero Institute. So to say you can't fight the state is just, it's being lazy, it's being bowing to the building industry, and I'll just let folks draw their own conclusions there. But yes, you can fight the state. I would fight the state.
And then
Your second question about the book signing, of course, I can't wait. A date will be coming soon, and obviously we have to be respectful of the current pandemic situation, so there's going to be some logistical hurdles, but it will be advertised in the Coast News, I'm sure, and through social media, so people will have an opportunity to come along, and I would be more than happy to sign a book and have a chat with them.
I think Julie had an add-on to
well, I have
part A, yeah.
I have an add-on and a question. A woman in near Fox Point Farms called me today, worried about the project near her house. And I explained to her, she was wondering, is there really anything you can do? Is there really anything you can do? And I said, well, if we keep the current mayor and council, we'll never know, because they're not interested in doing anything else other than what they've done. So the only way for any of us to know what else we can do is to get people in there who are willing to explore the options. And I think one of the first things we would do is reconsult the housing attorney that the old housing task force used. I heard that she was very good. Bruce Ayler shared with me that she would be worthy of working with. I think we have to. This is a fight for our city, and I'm all in. I'm all in to find a way and to work with Beverly Hills, Cupertino, Solana Beach, Coronado, Del Mar. There's probably 100 cities that are grappling with this, and of that 100, there's probably 40 that are actively fighting the state. I would rather join the 40 than roll over. And my question for Ian was, we have so much partisan divisiveness right now. Was it like that when Maggie was running for office?
At the local level, absolutely not. We didn't have partisan divisiveness per se, and I'll clarify that. When we're talking at the local level, of course, it's not Democrat, Republican, etc. It's opinions on the council. The divisiveness was 4-1, and there was no question about where anybody stood on any issues. And it was somewhat representative of what we see in Washington with the Democrats and Republicans today. If Maggie had an idea, it was nixed, unless it was to the benefit of the council majority of typically Stocks, Bond, Gallagher, and Guerin. And they fought long and hard. We had I think it was the 30th anniversary of becoming a city. I'm not sure it was exactly the 30th, but the date from when Encinitas Incorporated became a city. Because Maggie was for a big celebration, and the current council, of course, didn't like that idea that she was championing it. And also that our forefathers were somewhat at odds with this city council. We never had a big celebration of a city anniversary. It went virtually unnoticed. Now that's unheard of. And in our history, we lose something as a community by not celebrating these events. These should be celebrated. That's one example of how the partisanship nixed a part of our history. And it's sad. And these are the effects that can happen when you have a council that has, I wouldn't necessarily an agenda, but when somebody speaks, everybody else goes, oh yeah, okay, instead of fighters on this council. And I certainly don't suggest animosity and knockdown dragouts, but strong diversity of opinion where Encinitas residents end up with the best result.
Mm-hmm. That was well said. I couldn't agree with you more. I really, really, really hope we can get back to that. And I want to be part of getting us back to that. I'm not sure I can do it alone, but I think others are waking up to how the partisanship is hurting us right now.
You're not alone, Julie. And I think everybody here would agree.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, I mean, we're not talking about bad people here. So often we see in our society today different opinion, and therefore if they think differently than I do, I have to hate them. You know, I know a number of people, Tony, and I voted for Catherine in the past. These are good people. But at the end of the day, we're looking for strong leaders. And that's what this election is all about. And we need strong leadership of our city.
And I think we're getting close to wrapping up. I have another question from Vivian. And if anybody else has a question, either raise your hand and we'll look for you, or drop me a note through chat. But Vivian didn't have a microphone, and she has a good question. How would Maggie have handled incumbent PACs spending as much money to discredit the challengers as they are to elect the incumbents?
Well, she experienced that with the likes of David Meyer and others. I've got examples in the storeroom of all kinds of mayors, and Bruce had the same experience. He actually ran for council and suffered the same slings and arrows. She would cry. there was a human side to the Maggie Houlihan that perhaps the public didn't see. She was a human being. And with people calling her a whore and the council majority ganging up on her both inside and outside chambers and trying to block everything she did. But she understood that it was part of the process. And she understood that you can't overreact to these situations because it puts you off your game. If you're watching the opposition all the time, how do you move your agenda forward? You have to have faith in your platform and your agenda. And if you're in touch with the residents, which she was, and remained in touch with the residents, you are going to give yourself the best chance of success. If you're constantly hopping from one foot to the other, trying to duck or attack or defend something, what are you doing about your own agenda? And she focused on her agenda and let the rest of it pretty much pass by. And was successful in getting elected, and the following 2 elections came out with the most votes of any of the 3 open seats.
Thanks, Ian. You're terrific. And anybody who hasn't bought the book, started the book, or please do so. You can find it on Amazon. I put the link in the chat. Hopefully Ian will find a way to let us know when he's doing the book signing. I'd love to shake your hand. Well, I don't know if I can shake your hand in person. Rub elbows. And if anybody has any more questions, which I don't see, I'm going to, our candidates do. Yes, hold on. Go ahead, Julie.
Well,
Alex,
Alex, go ahead.
it's just a statement. I really thanks Ian. That was really powerful, and you're a true gentleman. I think I might have a couple of manslaughters under my belt if that happened to my wife. So good job, and thanks. I think it was really inspirational for the 3 of us tonight.
Very much so. Thank you.
And the reason I came is because I support these 3 candidates. I mean, obviously the chances of you all getting on are not good, but we need one strong voice at least. And then once you're on, we need to support that strong voice, because it's going to be a tough road. It's going to be a tough road, and the culture of councils are ever changing. And as we saw in the councils of the early 2000s, Mr. Stocks was a very strong personality and basically held sway over City Hall. And the other council members would, to a degree, follow his lead. So let's get at least one on, and more if possible, and then support them in their endeavors.
May I just say something quickly, Cindy?
Yes, of course.
Ian, I want to just say to you, first of all, you've been awesome, and you're a great friend, and I'm so proud to know you. I also was very proud to know Maggie. And one of the things about Maggie that I think could help these candidates is I don't know how she did it. I mean, she had a lot of charisma, obviously, but she also had a way of finding one thing that others might like, something that they were both in agreement upon. And then she worked out from that. At least that's my experience of her. She and I remember tangled, just as one particular, not tangled, but had a difference of opinion at one time. And so she was trying to sell me on her opinion. And of course, I'm pretty stubborn and I'm not going for it. But in the end, she was right and I was wrong. And that's just who she was. And the dynamite person she was is just almost, I haven't met too many people like that. And Ian, you're like that too. So I just want to thank you very much. And Cindy, thank you for having this forum.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. This has been great. All of you have been wonderful. Okay, council, candidates. See, I'm already calling you council.
I think that's a good idea.
No.
You guys want to say anything else? Because I don't want to get in trouble for ignoring you guys.
No, I'm good, and I appreciate it again. Thank you.
Well, we will see you all next week. I will be announcing next week's program very shortly through social media and email, etc. And it's going to be good. Maybe not as good as Ian, but it's going to be good. So make sure you're tuning in. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, candidates. Thank you, audience. And we'll see you next time. Signing out. Night.
Bye.
Bye.